Scourge Eternal Blackout Issue 4. We start out with Scourge being held and threatened by the evil Shadow, and despite his terrified first reaction, we see him tell him with a snarky expression to go easy on his jacket, no doubt trying to pretend he's not intimidated and calm himself down by pretending he doesn't take the situation seriously. I'm sure by this point he's been threatened with violence so many times that he's used to dealing with it by now. But the amount of times he's outright been held and threatened like this is probably way smaller with his super speed, and would take him right back to his childhood. It made me sad that he called his cool jacket 90s vintage though, because why does it have to be just 90s? I still think of black leather jackets as cool villain clothing. I don't get the people who would see Scourge dressed like that from the beginning and see it as a reason to not take him seriously, because I always just saw him as Sonic if he had cool clothes. I know that's stuck in the past, but come on, why does it have to be just a 90s thing? That wasn't funny. And Shadow actually lampshades that his lame jokes aren't helping him here, and he looks scared again as a result. So the writing's showing self-awareness. While modern Sonic stories like Sonic Boom would have no problem with having the protagonist's snarkiness deflate the tension, here the realistic thing happens and he goes right back to being as scared as he should be. Well, I say a realistic thing, but as I mentioned last issue, logically, if Shadow was violent enough to have kicked him as his first response for no real reason, why hasn't he just immediately killed him? If he's that confrontational, thinks he's annoying already, what is stopping him from killing him right here? Loneliness? Desperation for someone to talk to? I guess so. I guess he's just covering that up and acting tough then. Because he's got no actual reason to keep him alive at this point. But he has to be convinced to spare him or that'd make a shitty story. So I'm curious to see how this goes. I want to know why Shadow has a problem with a complete stranger being here and is demanding to know why, instead of just going, "Thanks for releasing me. I've never woken up without you." It's not like he's guarding the place and Scourge is an intruder. That's like if you freed a prisoner and he just grabbed you and asked, "Why are you here?" Scourge does actually lampshade that this is no way for Shadow to treat someone who freed him. So again, the writing's self-aware. Though still not enough to just explain why Shadow is bioengineered to be so confrontational. He'd make a pretty poor cure for all diseases if he was this way to everybody. So Scourge convinces him to spare him, because the same guy who wanted to threaten the guy who freed him can apparently be convinced to show gratitude with mere logic. So then why did he even threaten him in the first place? It was obvious that he freed him. So obvious that Scourge immediately thought to point that out when his life was at risk, and he's not exactly a mastermind of manipulation and lies. I picture him being brutally honest if anything. It turns out Shadow has amnesia for no explained reason. The meta-logic reason is obvious. It's there because of Heroes. But I really want to know the actual reason, and something tells me I won't be getting it for a long time. So just like in Heroes, him having amnesia is just there to create a long, dragged-out mystery in the easiest way possible. But at least in Heroes, it was easy to figure out why a fall from space would do that to him. Obviously, he landed on his head. Though even that's confusing, because if he had a ring to survive that fall, I guess from falling through one, how did the fall still manage to injure him? But here, who knows why he's got amnesia? It just feels like I got cheated out of learning his backstory, when that's something everybody wants to know the minute they'll see an alternate universe version of Shadow. But instead it's pushed ahead. I could have very easily been told what's up with him. But no, that gets ripped away from me for the next few years because it was more important to reference a video game. I can't even reverse engineer a backstory for him, because why would he ever fall from space in the reverse universe? We know why our Shadow fell from space. So did evil Shadow also have to deal with the whole story where he ended up on a satellite trying to destroy the world and had to fight the vial lizard? In the reverse universe, Jill Robotnik would have been evil, which means he would have still designed Shadow because the military would want a weapon, or at the very least he'd want to make a weapon for himself to take over the world with. So he'd have been designing Shadow to be just a weapon, and would probably never even consider making him a cure to diseases, since that would require compassion of him. Speaking of compassion, he'd have to be compassionate to even agree to let Maria live with him up in the Ark. So this Shadow might have never even met Maria, even if she did, through some absurd coincidence, happen to still have NIDS like her prime counterpart. What are the chances that most Marias had the exact same unlucky illness? It's more likely than anything that most Shadows didn't have a Maria. It's much more likely that this version of Shadow wouldn't have even had a Maria conveniently on the Ark to bond with. So that means no tragedy and PTSD over losing his only friend. Also, since evil Jill Robotnik would have no reason to object to the military using him as a weapon, The only way tragedy would have resulted against Shadow would be if he was only making him a secret agent for himself to take over the world with. As in, the military was right about Gerald Robotnik because this one's actually evil. So we'd have no Maria, have still lost Gerald, and thus have every reason to be evil and no reason to be good because who else would have given him a speech about helping humanity? And he has to have lost contact with Gerald, or else he wouldn't be here. Alone. So if this version of Gerald was always evil, why didn't he just immediately take over the world with Black Doom? Actually, that is a plot hole in Shadow the Hedgehog as well. Why did Black Doom approach Gerald to make Shadow 50 years ago? And not just immediately invade the Earth with the Black Arms right there? Why did he wait 50 years? Wait a minute, maybe the Black Arms were so busy fighting some other alien race, like, say, the Zorda, that's why they didn't invade 50 years ago. They were actually too busy with another war. Okay, that does make sense. I just wish we were told that. So if this version of Gerald was always evil, then him planning to destroy the world from the start? Well, wouldn't make sense because that directly conflict with him taking over the world with Shadow. And why else would he make him if he wanted to destroy the world? That's something that could be done far more effectively and efficiently with the ARC plan, not with one person. So the ARC plan would have been his revenge against the world if his plot to take over the world failed. Okay, but then how would evil Shadow have ever been convinced to try to stop the bio-lizard in his super form? I can't imagine Rosie the Rascal talking about letting the world get destroyed. And how would she have even gotten to the ARC? Maybe he got released after 50 years, tried to go super, but went super for evil reasons up in space instead, and that's how he fell to Earth and got this way. But why would he ever bother going super? Who would he feel the need to outright go super against? Who would be trying to protect the world from destruction, other than the good Robotnik, who would hardly require him to go super? Also, why was he made to go super 50 years ago after he was first made? I guess they had no way of getting all the Chaos Emeralds for him that quickly, so he was sealed away before that can happen. I guess him going super was just a required part of his plan to destroy the world. I mean, why not? Fleetway Supersonic was a real threat to the world, so why wouldn't Shadow be? I wouldn't have had to waste all this time speculating about Shadow's backstory here, or rather how SA2 could have happened in the reverse universe, if I was just immediately told what his backstory was. I guess Boomer released him the first time instead of Eggman. But no, if he cared about taking over the world, the whole reason Eggman found the Eclipse Cannon so alluring, then wouldn't Boomer have already done it? Fiona told Scourge later on that even he wasn't ruling the whole world. So it wasn't like Alicia was ruling it before him, and we were never told they had that as a goal in the first place. They were just called small-time thugs. And if they wanted to outright destroy the world, they would have done it. So Shadow must have been released by who knows who. I doubt Kinderboard would illegally release him from the government stronghold. Gerald's descendant was the only one who could have known about his grandfather's old project. And again, the evil twins didn't care about taking over the world. So they wouldn't have tried to steal info from the military to get an advantage, and thus find out about Shadow by accident, like Sonic X Eggman. Must have been some freak accident that got Shadow released. I guess the building he was held in got hit by a meteor, and that freed him without killing him, which is what led to them putting that armor on him. He'd be released from his pod, and then gone off to do his own thing, with no megalomaniac to manipulate. I just assumed this was the first time he had ever been released from a pod, but apparently it couldn't have been because he has amnesia for no apparent reason. As you can tell, trying to figure out his backstory is a headache when the story of SA2 is kinda impossible with the reverse universe. Eggman kicked off the plot, well he's good now. Who would ever free Shadow? So who would ever frame Sonic? Sonic's considered a criminal? Well, what else is new? And people can't do anything to stop him. So no imprisonment on Prison Island, and they'd have no reason to go up into space. Oh, by the way, how would Shadow have gotten up to space without any help? I guess he ran all over the planet to find Chaos Emeralds and went super. Yep, the story of SA2 would have been much more boring in the reverse universe. That's literally one sentence. And that just leaves me wondering why he failed to destroy the world at that point. He went super! I guess Scourge went super too and fought dirty to save himself. Who else would stop him? Except Scourge is meeting him for the first time here, and even gives him a new name. So obviously, according to this comic anyways, Shadow never could have gotten to the point where he was up in space and in super form. Because if he got to the point where he was trying to destroy the world, and thus would have gotten amnesia, Scourge would have found out about him and fought him. But obviously, the minute he would have first woken up after 50 years, he would have tried to get revenge for Gerald and thus met Scourge. That's what's confusing about this amnesia thing. It reminds you of Heroes, But apparently here, he must have been woken up for the first time in 50 years and gotten amnesia from a different thing. Like, it was just a natural, intentional consequence of being put in the pod. That would have been a brilliant solution for the military after capturing a pissed-off ultimate life form. Erase his memories so that even if the guy is too scared to use as a weapon yourself does go free, he won't remember his grudge. If they had the technology to put him in a stasis tube for 50 years, then why not? It's a confusing mixing of heroes and SA2 plot points, and just one flashback panel not shown from Shadow's perspective would have cleared things up for me right away. Instead, I end up spending paragraphs on trying to figure this guy out, which I had to do because he's going to be doing nothing but confusing and annoying me the entire time if I don't. And I can't get invested and immersed at that point because the plot hole is too distracting. Shadow is the one Sonic character where you need to know his backstory. It's not like we were told that this pod is what first created him and this is his first time being alive. Okay, so bottom line, this Shadow just woke up after 50 years and the only reason he's not trying to destroy the world is because of convenient, machine-induced amnesia. The easiest excuse for having a Shadow who would never have a reason to become good is that he never had a Maria. She would be evil in this universe. But then why was his pod found in the good Eggman's basement? What, was it a hand-me-down? A family heirloom? They wouldn't do that. Why would he want an evil living weapon like him? Wouldn't his pod be kept by the military? The good Eggman wouldn't illegally try to track down the ultimate life form. He'd be much less likely to be a cure for NIDS in this universe, just to hide him in his basement instead of releasing him, and not reprogram him to be good. At that point, what's the point? The military obviously was never planning on taking advantage of him if it hadn't used him in 50 years, so why not leave it alone? And how could Kinderborg just be totally oblivious to a military prison complex for Shadow under his tower? Why would he have been allowed to build his hospital tower on government prison property? Him even being here is a pretty big plot hole, and I hope it ends up getting built. Or I guess it'd be nicer to just call it a mystery. But mysteries are hard to take seriously when they're dragged out for months and exist for no good reason. Like with any other character, you could get away with not explaining his backstory right away, but this is Shadow. We need to know why he is the way he is. He's not someone who's had a normal life, and we don't even know why he was created in this universe. Anyways, in an incomprehensible panel, Scourge says he'll call Shadow Double Stripes, which takes too long to say, so I'll just call him Shadow. He says he regrets letting him live, and I guess he's just being a tsundere here, because if he was really a jerk, he'd realistically kill him right here. Scourge says that maybe they can help each other out. After all, he'd be better off having this guy with him than against him. It's pretty smart of him. Instead of furiously trying to beat him up for threatening him, he realizes he's met his match right away and wants to use him as a partner instead. He's not nearly as egotistical as you'd expect, and realistically he's not too perfect at dealing with him because he annoys him with his new name for him and openly complains that he's stuck with the guy who has amnesia, both of which could have provoked him. So it helps balance out the fact that he immediately thought of a way to talk him out of killing him. Scourge downplays his mission by calling it a little side gig, another sign that he's not too fond of working for Finidus anymore, and says he's looking for dark voodoo magic stuff, which you'd think Finidus would already have with the black magical energy coming from his hands. Isn't he powerful enough? Also, if Finidus can make warp rings, why would he ever think he needs Scourge to find magical stuff for him? Why can't he just make a portal to the Master Emerald in another zone and steal it himself? Create a warp ring below it and make it fall right in front of him. He's not really thinking with portals. I don't see why he'd need anyone's help. Why didn't he go super with the Master Emerald actually? I always wondered why Finidus didn't just try to destroy the world himself instead of using Knuckles to do it. Especially if he's supposed to be a photo-negative of Knuckles who somehow got access to his power, and yet wasn't made as omnipotent as Chaos Knuckles was at the time. So that's a third mystery that this comic has so far. Why does Finidus think he needs Scourge in the first place, when he even thinks he's a foolish boy? Anyways, Scourge acknowledges that Shadow doesn't remember his name, so I guess he's only asking if dark magic is around here out of desperation. Shadow says he thinks he might know where. Of course, something could still ring as familiar to him even if he has no memories of it. That's how it works. And after Scourge complains about them being in the dark wandering around blind, Shadow finally lights things up with his powers. After some panels are wasted from Shadow's insult where it sounded too formal to not come off as tame and weak, Scourge recaps why he's here, looking entertaining the whole time, reminding me why I like him. The fact that he's even having fun explaining this to him, someone he just met who he's afraid of, makes him come off as someone lonely who's kinda desperate to get him as an actual friend. Like he's hoping that he'll warm up to him if he acts likable around him. Maybe that's how he used to be with Patch, and that's why he didn't just go full on enemy and kill him years ago. And Shadow's just annoyed with him for only finding him by accident. I hate that he said on accident. Again, Scourge got lucky because he just walks away instead of his gratitude and patience wearing out on him. Scourge really doesn't look happy to be with him, powerful ally or not. It'd be way less stressful for him to just not have him around. But he can't exactly get away with ditching him at this point. I'm just thinking of how he'll look like a weak leader to Predator Hawk if he's constantly looking terrified of Shadow threatening him. Shadow would totally upstage him. And Predator outright said to Scourge that if he started to find him weak, he'd go hunt him instead. So what if Scourge bringing Shadow into his team would just cause him to have to run away from the Destructors with Fiona because Shadow would make him lose standing with them? Well, he wanted an excuse not to be with the Destructors anyways. He went to prison and went from saying there's advantages to being in a team to saying he doesn't want them as friends and should be independent. So he clearly got tired of them. Anyways, he tells Shadow that he should still be grateful to him for freeing him anyways, and Shadow directs his attention to a place with cracked, broken pillars in front of them. Clearly he wasn't that mad at him, only finding him by accident then if he's already moved on. It's confusing that he says, if I recall correctly, this place was once a research facility. How do you recall anything with amnesia? I get that he'd find this place familiar, but wait, how? Wasn't he knocked out put in a pod by an enemy for 50 years? Why would the place he woke up in later be familiar to him at all? Was he put to sleep intentionally by his version of Gerald? Why? He'd want him to take over the world right away. So he must have been put to sleep by the military, who conveniently just happened to have a stasis pod right in Gerald's lab to take advantage of. Maybe even a megalomaniac would see the benefit in making these stasis pods for the sake of healing himself, if anything. Now after all, Eggman made one for Shadow. Okay, so Gerald's old research facility, because who else would it be, was right below Kintobor's hospital tower. He just obliviously built it over top of this. And at no point did the military decide to just bring Shadow with them after they forced him into the pod, and just left him here where anyone could obliviously end up trespassing into his prison. Yeah, SA2 made a lot more sense. Why isn't he in a military compound? There's no evil Eggman here. It's not like he was being made androids of, or we'd know about it. He's clearly been awake before because he has memories. Did Gerald hide him in the pod so the military wouldn't find him? Was the pod a backup plan to make sure his agent for revenge would be released eventually? Okay, I just wish I could have been told that. I do find it pretty fun to speculate about his backstory though. Scourge is clearly not looking forward to spending time in the abandoned research facility, and looks forward to getting out of the place, and again takes a risk with Shadow by ordering him to look somewhere. That's the problem with how he interacts with his friends, and was probably not helping his case with Patch. Even when he wants to be friends, he still ends up constantly risking offending and provoking just by being the way he is. Casual and honest. It seems inevitable that Shadow will get fed up with him. Just like the Prime Shadow, he's surprisingly honorable for a confrontational antisocial. Then Shadow snarks at him to be more discreet about stopping to stare at him. He must have figured out from hearing his lack of footsteps behind him. Obviously Scourge did because he was scared of him and didn't really trust him with his power and all. Shadow's just finding every excuse to snark at him. Huh, Scourge said sorry. That was nice of him. He didn't have to do that. He actually reveals that he was staring at his pink getup, which I hardly even register what it is based on its appearance. He explains that it's an anarchy regulator armor to keep his power under safe levels, and his armor was what saved Scourge's life. Okay, first of all, why the hell would he call it anarchy regulator armor? They only started calling Chaos Emeralds anarchy barrels after Scourge took over the world very recently, and Shadow would have no reason to be aware of that, asleep and trapped. And also, why would people keep humoring him about using different names for everything after he was gone? Scourge never told him he changed the name of Chaos Energy on his planet, and Shadow wouldn't have a reason to humor him if he did. It doesn't make sense that he was made by Kintobor 50 years ago if he knows the different name of Chaos Energy. The only other person who would have made him was Boomer. That doesn't explain it all either. Or maybe this dialogue just means nothing about his past, and it's just a stupid oversight. Gerald is the only person who could have possibly made him, because if it was Kintopor, the only other option, then he'd be with Buns. All of that is even mentioning the fact that Shadow knows what the name of his armor is, and what it's meant to do, despite having amnesia. It's like it wasn't thought through at all. He just has amnesia so he can't tell Shadow's backstory. But then he proceeds to tell him bits about his backstory anyways, so it's just there for an unneeded game reference. He would find his armor familiar, but he wouldn't remember its outright name, would he? At the very least, I can say that if he has this armor restricting his power at all, then whoever saw fit to give it to him had a lot more responsibility and forethought than Gerald or even the military did in SE2. If he was made as just a weapon to take over the world, or destroy it, then his creator never would have had a reason to give him armor that actively makes that harder. If he'd want a way to control his creation, he would have put a bomb in him that would let him self-destruct him with a remote just in case. Not to mention he'd have been born with a brain that's engineered to have him carry out Gerald's will and be loyal to him, which would make inhibiting him a paranoid redundancy anyways. So it makes more sense that his armor was only given to him after Gerald, after he was captured. Kentopor is the only person in this universe that I could imagine would have given him that armor. He's the only one with advanced technology skills who's also benevolent and responsible, as far as we know. The military wouldn't just conveniently have that armor on hand. They're lucky they even had a stasis pod 50 years ago at that. Why would they bother giving him armor if they never plan on using him again, just want to seal him away? Another thing that's confusing, he credits the armor for saving Scourge's life. I thought it was Shadow himself deciding to show gratitude to him, be patient with him, and actually have someone to talk to. I guess it makes sense though. If he was really too powerful, he'd already have the power explode out of him in a chaos blast the instant he grabbed him just because he got angry. But who would actually design him to be that way? That'd be like a mad scientist making a soldier who'd do a chaos blast if he spilled some milk. That's a disaster waiting to happen. So he must have made him like that by accident by using too much magic on him. It makes sense. How is Gerald supposed to know exactly how much chaos energy you need for Shadow to be the way he is anyways? That kind of thing would require guesswork, and he was lucky he got it right. With the Bio Lizard, all he could give it was chaos control, so I guess he gave it too little. And if his version of Gerald just made him to be a weapon, of course he would have used too much magic for him. This definitely proves Kentopor didn't make him. Kentopor didn't even outfit Buns with genuine weapons, just non-lethal foam. So he'd never make Shadow have combat powers because he wouldn't feel comfortable. Apparently, he's just a total pacifist who never believed in fighting back at all. That totally explains why he survived against the evil twins for so long, with robots that can't fight back. As if this page wasn't endlessly confusing enough, Shadow's actually proud of being forced to wear inhibiting armor, saying that's one of a kind, instead of just being an angsty that he's too powerful for his own good and has to wear this thing no matter what. How is he expected to wash his chest? I guess every time he has to take a shower, the armor comes off, and people just have to hope he doesn't explode with rage in the meantime. Or more likely, he never washes beneath the armor, and that would smell, especially when he's working up a sweat running around. Being forced to always wear something would suck. But somehow he's smug about it, just to force another way for him to not get along with Scourge. And somehow he implies Scourge is jealous of his armor, and Scourge confirms that he is. And granted, his over-the-top, blatant lies rage about not being jealous does make sense in that he'd be jealous of his power, but he'd never be jealous of armor that forces him to be less powerful. It even looked stupid, so why would he want to wear something so embarrassing to wear? It just looks like a pink shirt that conveniently doesn't cover his chest hair, because that's how shirts are designed. Why would Shadow of all people wear a pink shirt? Shadow says that he's detecting some unusual energy nearby, because apparently this Shadow has the Emerald Radar. So this place is so familiar to him, and yet he suddenly finds energy he should have always been familiar with unusual? What makes it unusual? Logically, how would it be any different from the chaos energy he's always been familiar with from using it? It's magic, so how would different magics feel different? I don't see how this convenient veil of black and purple DNA would be any different from chaos energy. So this confusing veil is just right here next to a pile of books. Who made it? Why was it just sitting here all this time with no one taking advantage of it until now? Wouldn't it have been locked away with Shadow if it was considered dangerous? Why was it here? This is just so confusing. Wouldn't the military have found this after searching the research facility and imprisoning Shadow? Which must have happened to make it abandoned in the first place? You'd think the military would have either hidden it with Shadow or taken it to research it themselves. I always assumed that the thing Venidivus wanted to find for him was a DNA sample from Shadow. Though even then, how did he know about him? But this is no better. How did Venidivus know about this thing? He's not from this universe. I think nobody in this area for the past 50 years would know about this thing. And yet Venidivus knew better than Kentopor. And Shadow better explain to me what this thing is and why it's here, because if he knows the name of his armor and knows the history of the research facility, he shouldn't be drawing a blank on this. After Scourge casually orders Shadow to grab the vial, Shadow gets scared for no reason and manipulates Scourge into doing it because he doesn't want to be robbed of his moment of glory. How would Shadow magically sense danger like that? He's not a psychic. And you'd think he'd be arrogant enough as the ultimate life form to think there's nothing he can't handle. But again, it was interesting to see Scourge's desperation for a genuine friend here, as he immediately says he likes the way he thinks from this one moment of common decency, and gives him a friendly hand gesture. Already he's treating him like they're old pals. So the Veil says that it's about time someone shows him some respect. I had to really struggle to read those words because they were tiny and color weirdly. And then, what happened? It's hard to read. Is that the word hiss? Did it just make a hissing sound and that was it? It's hard to tell what's going on in this panel. You can only really see Scourge and a giant sound effect word. That's not even mentioning the fact that the vial content is being stupid by threatening the only people who would ever let it out of the vial. And also, how could a DNA strand act like this? But apparently it decided to calm down immediately because it stops bothering them after this. Good thing it didn't explode out of the vial and attack them in the form of a giant monster, which is what this panel made me expect, because then I'd be wondering why it stayed in that vial for so long if it could break out like that. I guess the vial restrains its power enough that it can't magically break out of it, but doesn't keeping it from hissing really loudly. Then Scourge finds some research papers on it, and for once Shadow is the one who's not intellectual, as he's sarcastic about it sounding interesting, when you'd think he'd want to learn all about the research facility to discover his true past. Does he already know what's written on these pages? Is he lying about his amnesia? If he doesn't want him to read it, why doesn't he just destroy the pages? The papers tell him that field researchers came across a magical artifact that they believe comes from the planet's nucleus. A planet doesn't have a nucleus, so they must have been speaking metaphorically. And they must have already known about Dark Gaia energy since they're immediately convinced of where this artifact came from. It's not like the artifact has the location it's from written on it, does it? Why would an artifact, a man-made object, be in the planet's core? Isn't that insanely hot? Who put it there? Why wouldn't it just stay above ground where people could take advantage of its magical power? If someone responsible wanted to get rid of it for humanity, they would have just chucked it in the ocean or into a volcano, not gone all the way to the planet's core, somehow. And that also applies to it being here. If someone put it here so that no one could find it again, wouldn't it make more sense for them to just throw it in a volcano or into the ocean? And core essence does make a lot more sense of a name than Dark Gaia energy, because the latter requires already knowing about Dark Gaia, when people would only know about it after it already destroyed the world. I guess they know about it through psychics. But here, it's a name related to the core of the planet. Then there's another entry, saying that they made a big miscalculation, and due to unexpected energy spikes from the last few days emanating from something that's conveniently not being told to us, under Gerald Kintopor's orders, they have to seal away their highly immersed Project Shadow. That was actually Gerald's name in Archie, since Robotnik's real last name was Kintopor. Issue 98 outright went out of its way to only call him Gerald, or the Professor, but never called him by the last name Robotnik. My spell checker underlined emanating the way it's spelled in this comic, by the way. So, based on what we see in this panel, and the words Project Shadow, Evil Shadow was made by Gerald, and he gave him too much power after he had already made him. That makes less sense. Wouldn't he have made him as powerful as he could to begin with, if he wanted that? I guess he did, and this was the only way to make him a better weapon for him. Am I supposed to believe that while Shadow's out-of-control magic damaged the papers enough that Scourge couldn't read all of the report, it conveniently left just enough so that he could get the gist of it? Wouldn't the magic just completely incinerate the entire report? So, is this story telling me that the Veil is the same energy that empowered Shadow too much? Then how did anyone manage to put that magic back into the Veil after it empowered Shadow? Why would Shadow in that state have been nice enough to willingly give up all that power he went berserk with and killed innocent researchers for no reason to put it back in the Veil? I guess they knocked him out with sleeping gas. I mean, we saw sleeping gas work perfectly fine in the Knuckles comic, so sleeping gas works perfectly fine in Archie. There's some dramatic irony here, as Scourge doesn't know the message talking about Shadow himself because he has no familiarity with him. And surprisingly, even this version of Shadow actually tears up at hearing about what he did to those researchers. I guess because the story sounded familiar, it brought back the actual memory, so we knew the full details. I love seeing the depth to his character that this adds. That he really is honorable at heart instead of a pure evil twin. More importantly, I'm looking forward to Scourge's reaction to learning that he's crying. But wait a minute, Scourge met the Prime Shadow twice. He fought him with Sonic, and he made a pretty big impression. He forced him to run away from him. Granted, he wouldn't have told him his name there, but wouldn't he have learned his name in Hedgehog Havoc? Wouldn't Scourge know the alternate Shadow's name based off recognizing the familiar appearance? He looks like a guy who forced him to run away from him with Rouge, and was part of a mob of hedgehogs trying to attack him. But I guess he just completely forgot about Shadow after that, because that was just another day for him. He's used to being threatened already. Why do you remember yet another person who he attacked and had to run away from? Still, you'd think he'd recognize the appearance of someone who faced him as an enemy twice. I could forgive him not knowing his name. It was a hectic day both times he dealt with him, and he was very distracted on all sides. But just seeing him should have brought back at least one memory. Shadow was the only person other than Sonic who proved he could have a chance of catching up to him when he ran from him. He needed Finitevus to save him from him in the first place. That's how they first met. He wouldn't forget that, would he? But apparently he would, since it's been such a long time. I mean, he did go through all of prison after that, which gave him much worse problems than being chased one time. So maybe it just barely makes sense that he didn't recognize the other Shadow. He's met a ton of people and never had to deal with just Shadow alone before. So he would have been just another guy to him, aside from him almost catching up to him. Shadow reveals that he was Project Shadow, and talks as if he's just now learning that they thought they could keep him under wraps forever by leaving him alone in the Sanctum, saying it was pathetic. Interestingly though, he's still tearing up, so it's not like he suddenly went from sympathetic to flat villain mode. He should at least understand why he was put under wraps though. I guess he was sealed away by Gerald and his researchers out of fear. Even though that defeats the whole point of making him then, and yet this was all under Gerald's orders? So much for him having a weapon. Why would having too much magic cause him to kill the researchers and make Gerald turn on him? I guess it just magically rewired his brain. Gerald must have been the one who made the restraining armor. Why wouldn't he have just left it at that instead of outright putting him under? Wouldn't only the military have outright put him to sleep? I hope he's just misinterpreting it then, because that'd be stupid of Gerald. Oh, I'm gonna make a powerful weapon for myself. Oh no, it's powerful! I never expected this! I better seal it away. So much for all my hard work. I'm not gonna make another one or anything. We aren't told Gerald got executed in this universe, so why wouldn't he have just made another Shadow that he wouldn't have to seal up, and not repeat the same mistake with him? Well, he'd have to meet Black Doom again, but if he was able to contact him and make Shadow from him in the first place, I'm sure he could always call him up and say, I need to make another Shadow, do you mind? Since this is an opportunity so obvious that even he can see it, Scourge sees this as an easy opportunity to manipulate Shadow into wanting revenge, saying that wanting revenge is another thing he has in common with them, and adding that he somehow thinks Shadow looks like him. I guess hedgehogs are really rare where he grew up. He's probably saying this to give Shadow more reason to stick with him and stay on his side, instead of trying to kill him or otherwise not help him anymore. He's more likely to survive and succeed if he focuses Shadow on hating someone other than him. If he didn't do this and try to get his rage to move on to having a plan, Shadow might have just lashed out at him because he happens to be there. Anyways, how would Shadow ever expect to get direct revenge? Whoever imprisoned him, how would he be able to track them down? He wouldn't know their names, and it's been 50 years. He wouldn't necessarily be able to accurately remember all of their faces either. It's not a realistic goal for him to attain after 50 years. It'd make more sense for him to want revenge on humanity, but we aren't told Gerald was executed to give Shadow reason to want that, since he ordered him to be sealed away. Wouldn't the Shadow have much less reason to turn out evil? Because there's no military conspiracy against him? They had every reason to lock him away, so that's a much weaker excuse to go full-on villain than Maria and Gerald's deaths. If he was crying because he felt guilty about killing people, you'd think he'd understand why he was locked away and want to be locked away again. Like how in the depressing emo ending of Shadow the Hedgehog, Shadow's like, I've caused so much destruction, I never should have been created, so he decides to go hide on the Ark. Wouldn't this Shadow just want to do that? Scourge says he could use an ally like him, and somehow expects him to believe they might run into the people who left him here on another planet entirely from his own. That's stupid enough that I'm honestly hoping he'll refuse to shake his hand. But Shadow's always had a history of partnering up and being gullible way too easily with bad guys, and just doing what they want for no good reason. So even though Shadow has no reason at all to be invested in another person's war against a completely different planet from his, which couldn't be any more far removed from his own revenge plot, Shadow somehow thinks that's an offer he can't turn down, even though he doesn't need him at all. He just wants to attack any humans he sees, even if they're on another planet apparently. Well, Scourge did say on this world and another, so fine, it kinda makes sense. Shadow's lost and has no other option for company, so it's either he goes with Scourge, or, well, he's Shadow. Wouldn't he be fine with being on his own? He could fight all the humans he wanted without having to humor a Scourge in his own plan. He has no attachment to himself. He's really not thinking straight to just arbitrarily partner up with him, when he's done nothing but show that he has no respect for him. Like here, instead of being concerned that there's a threat behind Scourge, he just snarks that he needs to learn how to watch his back. Why not leave him already then? So Shadow saves Scourge from the foam attack from Buns by picking him up and flying with his rocket shoes. And the story ends with Buns threatening Scourge, and exactly none of my questions about the issue being answered. I can't wait for a year from now when I'll finally see these plot holes resolved. I mean, mysteries. So this issue by Scourge's best buddy was about Shadow snarking at Scourge the entire time they walked through an abandoned research facility, making me wonder why he doesn't just kill him like he originally wanted to, since if he's honorable enough to keep him alive for freeing him, why didn't he threaten and kick him in the first place? Eventually, after a whole bunch of time with no action and nothing but talking, they find a convenient veil of dark Gaia energy that had empowered Shadow to the point where he was seen as too powerful, and sealed away by the same researchers of Gerald who apparently wanted him more powerful in the first place. This implies that since they wanted him more powerful, they really did just want him as a weapon. And yet, they sealed him away for being too good of a weapon? Make up your minds! I would have liked to have been told that he was knocked out with sleeping gas after that point, because otherwise, how did anyone contain him? Why did he just end up destroying everything? Why did anyone bother to put restraining armor on him if they're just gonna imprison him later anyways? Couldn't have been the exact same people doing it then. Him wanting revenge because he was justifiably put under wraps is a much weaker excuse for his villainy than the Shadow and SA2 had. There's no military conspiracy causing the deaths of his loved ones, and yet he wants to kill all humans because they merely imprisoned him. But he was asleep the whole time. It could have been a lot worse. Scourge would have loved to have slept through all of prison. So as I expected, we weren't given enough details on Shadow's backstory, but at least I can get the gist of it. Gerald made Shadow. We aren't directly told why he made him, but it's easy to figure out. It's not easy to figure out why the Veil of Core Essence wasn't imprisoned with Shadow. It's still confusing that Kintabor's tower could have been built above the abandoned research facility with him never finding out about Shadow. It's still confusing that Shadow was kept here instead of in a military compound where no one would ever find him. And it's still confusing that Finifus even knew about the Core Essence in the first place. Not to mention it's confusing that the Veil of Mere Dark Gaia energy was able to talk. So is he Mephiles and Dark Gaia? Never able to talk? Who could have put him in that veil after somehow being stupid enough to fuse Mephiles with Dark Gaia? Needless to say, there's still a lot of questions that should have been answered. Does Shadow have a werehog form because he was infused with Dark Gaia energy? It's also going to be confusing that Shadow, a being with chaos control, won't just immediately deal with Buns by teleporting her away, teleporting her suit apart, freezing time so she's not even slightly a threat, or at the very least chaos blasting her to death. Somehow be expected to believe that a guy who wants to kill all humans won't do any of that, and immediately get rid of the threat that he's given no reason to hold back on. I can only give the writing the benefit of the doubt by assuming that this version of Shadow can't use his auto-win button of chaos control, especially not with that armor restricting him. And maybe he even needs a Chaos Emerald to do chaos control, especially with that armor restricting him. I guess the armor won't let him chaos blast either. But still, if he can threaten Scourge's electricity, you'd think he'd just KO Buns immediately with it. Metal is a great conductor of electricity, so it would go right through that mecha suit to her, and he has no way of knowing she's anything but a robot, so he wouldn't hold back. So I guess the next issue will simply be about showing what good people at heart these villains are. Because instead of Shadow just killing her, he'll be honorable enough to hold back and run away from her for the same reason he's kept Scourge alive. I guess that makes enough sense. There's no way Buns would win against Shadow if he was actually trying his best. So I don't see why I'm expected to find her an intimidating threat to them, especially since they can run at sonic speed, so they just instantly leave her in the dust. So realistically, we couldn't even have a whole story about them being chased by her and not trying to attack her much at all, because if they want to leave her behind, they would easily. If Shadow did anything with his power against Buns that Scourge couldn't do, she'd be screwed. We need to be told that she had rings to have her survival have any believability at all. Anything interesting that Shadow could do against her would be too dangerous. So the next issue would be about them merely spin attacking her? Sounds like a pretty boring, repetitive action scene. I hope Buns' fight with them will encompass a very small amount of the next issue then, because I just want to get a move on. I want to see what Venivus' plan will be. I want to see Scourge finally showing how much he loves Fiona to justify her being in this comic. And I can't see that if it's just a story about Buns failing to injure them.